Hey everybody, this is Jackie Lukeman, and welcome to a special edition of Live and Coffee Current Events and Politics in Lukeman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media. And yeah, this is just a little lunchtime lesson that just came to me as I'm kind of navigating all of the stuff that's going on around the country, around the world. Definitely dealing with how people are responding to dealing with what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and also dealing with people responding to what happened in Kenosha, and kind of reckoning with being on social media and seeing people on people in groups I belong to say really like shouldn't surprise me, doesn't really surprise me, but it's still jarring when you see someone say about the murderer, the 17-year-old terrorist who murdered two people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that he's not a murderer, he's a hero. And it's been crazy seeing people talk about how all of the protests around the country are destroying cities, and cities are being burned to the ground, right? And it's the same kind of stuff that we heard about Baltimore and Ferguson back in 2014, 2015. Wow, it just blows my mind when we see comments like that, and we see comments about how cities are so violent and black people are so violent, and people are acting kind of clueless about why people are protesting, why black people are angry, why indigenous people are angry, why Latinx people are angry, why people who are allies of those people are protesting against not just racist police terror, as the protests originated from the public lynching of George Floyd, but also now the conversation around these protests is extending to challenging the capitalist system that creates the kind of oppression that people live under, that a brutal racist police force has to be used to maintain. Right? So people are having these conversations, larger conversations about capitalism and imperialism and militarism, stemming from the public lynching of George Floyd. And in all of these cities where protests have occurred, these anti-racism protests have occurred, anti-oppression protests have occurred that people just love to call Black Lives Matter protests, but okay. Because this has been going on for longer than Black Lives Matter has existed, but that's okay. All right. So there's a lot of pushback from a lot of white people who just swear that none of this stuff matters. It doesn't exist. The racist police terrorism doesn't exist. The police really aren't killing a higher percentage of black people than they do white people. That racism is not a bad thing. It's not a big deal, and everybody has the same opportunities. And black people just don't want to do anything, and they're just lazy, and they're just criminal, and they should all just be thrown in prison. Blah 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 blah. And it's really it's the past week has been like really hard for me emotionally. I'm just going to be really honest with y'all. It's really hard to cover this every day. It really is hard to cover this, to read the corporate media reports and how they spin and slant things. It's hard to read people's comments on these articles. It's hard to report on the ongoing violence against black people and our allies every day. It's real hard. So emotionally, it's just been I've been in a really messed up place for the past few days, and I guarantee you a lot of your black friends are not okay right now. And a lot of our allies and comrades not okay right now, because we black people have always recognized, and indigenous people have always recognized that this nation has always been at war with us. But much of this nation has never wanted to believe that that was true. But when you think about it, when you really step back from the emotionality of it and you think about the way this nation is situated, the way people exist in this nation, and I do mean in the most basic sense, the physical way people exist in this country, then it sort of begins to make sense why so many white people believe the most ridiculous garbage about racial issues in this country. Like, how are people believing that this kid is not a white supremacist terrorist? Why are they calling him a hero? Because there are a lot of people who actually believe that protesters are really just burning cities to the ground and that they need to be stopped. And then you have to ask yourself, how can people believe that? Because, see, you and I understand that that's absolutely not true, because, see, you and I live pretty close to each other. We are in this struggle. We are around people who are in these areas, so we know what's going on, really. And we know that the corporate media is not reporting everything that is happening. Like right here in Washington, D.C., the only way you're going to get a real sense of what is happening in D.C. is if you go on the Twitter page of some people who are out on what's called Black Lives Matter Plaza right now, protesting during the day, and everything's fine and there are no incidents and everything is copacetic and everything is cool. But as soon as it gets late enough at night for most of the corporate journalists and most of the independent journalists to leave, then the police come out and they start assaulting and harassing protesters. So, I mean, listen, there is a logical and very simple reason for why people so easily believe a lot of just absolute garbage and lies about racial issues in this country, and I'm fitting to show you why. Now, let me put this over in the top. There you go. It's probably easier to see that. I've talked about this before. Make that a little bit bigger. Slide it over to the right. There you go. I've talked about this before. Probably a couple of years back. I can't remember how long ago it was that I talked about this map and how much I love this map from the U.S. Census. Let me move over a little bit so you can see it better. And how important this map is in explaining a whole lot of things about what goes on in this country, about what people believe about people they don't live around. Because the fact of the matter is, the reason so many white people in this country believe whatever is pushed out in the media about black people, it's because mostly white people don't live around black people in this country. That's just the truth. This map is from the U.S. Census. Excuse me. It is a map that you can customize. You can display a whole lot of different things. And you can display, population by age and sex, family and housing. But this map is a population by race. Okay? And I am intentionally showing the percentage, as you can see here, the percentage of black or African American people living in this country right now. Well, as at the time that this map was compiled. And I think this was recent as of the last census and tax records, I think. So The darkest areas in the map reflect the highest percentage of Black or African American population in the country. All right? The lighter colored areas in the map. Did you see what I did there? You see what I did there? I made this real simple. I made this really easy for you to understand. The lighter areas in the map are the areas with the least amount of Black people living in that area. The browner areas in the map, the areas in the country with the most percentage of Black people. So when you look at the entire map of the entire country, you see the issue. I hope you can see it clearly. This is why conservative media, talk radio, Fox News, and even to some extent so-called liberal-leaning media that really screws up the narratives of their coverage of racial events is so effective in convincing so many white people that Black people are just criminal, lazy, want handouts, evil, just want to have a bunch of babies, and these protests are really just fronts for the radical Blacks and Antifa to destroy the cities. It's because most people who believe that garbage don't actually live around any Black people. I mean, as I say it, I'm laughing because it sounds so ridiculously simple. It sounds so ridiculous that it can't be that simple, but it honestly is. It honestly is that simple as to one of the major reasons for why so many white people are so quick to believe whatever they see on Fox News or whatever they hear coming out of conservative talk radio. And why corporate media doesn't really do very much to do better with the way they frame the stories that they push out to the entire nation, because they know that it's not Black people who pays their bills. It's white people. So when you have wide swaths of the country, I mean just 80-90% of the country, where most white people just do not live around a bunch of Black people. They just don't live near us. So they have no frame of reference for Black people other than what they see on television, what they read in periodicals, what they hear on the radio. And even when we look at the so-called liberal cities that the current Republican, the Trump publicans now are blaming on capitulating to the radical left, they're not even full of Black people. I mean, look at California, supposed to be this liberal state that's full of these radical people. I mean, most of the cities in California are not majority Black populations. And even the ones with high black populations, with significant Black populations, they're literally less than 10% Black. Los Angeles, here is San Bernardino County, which has a pretty sizable population of Black people. It's only 8.9% though. Only not even a whole 10% of Black people living in San Bernardino County. Los Angeles County, 8.7% Black people. People think that Los Angeles is like 80% Black because of Compton for some reason. Los Angeles is about, according to this census map, and this is Los Angeles County, 8.7% Black. So that means like all of the Black people are concentrated in Compton. But there's a whole bunch of other counties that are surrounding that area, like Compton and Watts, where there aren't any. Oh my God. What's this little brown speck here? This is Kings County, California, 7.2% Black. Let me see if I can blow this map up a little bit so we can, that's too much, but that's okay. Let's move it over. Let's see, over here, San Joaquin County, 7.6% Black. San Francisco County is only 6.1% Black. I've never heard of Lassen County, California. I don't know everything. 8.1% black. And these are the places with the highest percentage of black or African American populations in the state. But if you look at the other cities around the state of California, all of these places have significantly lower percentage of black people living in. Oh boy. This is Nevada, Clark County, Nevada, 10.5% black. Everywhere else in Nevada, the percentage of black population is around 2 to 3%, 4% being the highest, it looks like. I'm laughing because this is just the population of people living in this country existing the way they do is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The reason people live this way, not in proximity to people who are not like them, is because people wanted it that way. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. So, yeah, if we look over here in Denver, El Paso County, 6.2% African American. Where are you? Arapahoe, a whole 10.2% in Arapahoe. Crowley County, 9.6%. Brent, 7.6%. You notice something? Do you notice something? That the highest percentage of black population in the country is in the southern states. That's not by accident. That's not accidental. What existed in this country predominantly in the southern states, but not just in the southern states. Let's make this clear. Slavery. Most of the southern states were slave states, but not only the southern states. Let's be clear on this. Maryland and Delaware were also slave states. But Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, Florida, they were all slave states. So the reason most black people who live in this country live in the states that were formerly slave states is because that's where our ancestors were. And the reason more black people did not migrate from these slave states to the rest of the country, some did, millions did, but millions more did not. Why? Because of the violence that met them when they tried to migrate, when they did migrate to other states. This is where sundown towns in the Midwest and on the West Coast originated. It's why they were originated. This is why states like Oregon had in their constitution that black people could not settle in the state. It was in the Constitution of Oregon that black people could not live anywhere in the state. Those things were implemented, sundown towns and constitutional mandates to keep black people from settling in these states, and the outright racist terrorism from white people who didn't want black people living next to them when they migrated from the South to the North and the Midwest. Those things happened because black people tried or did migrate from the slave-holding states to the so-called free states, and they found that they won't free there either. So I want to try to show you a few other things that I hope kind of puts this into perspective. And this isn't going to take long. And this wasn't even something I planned. It's just something that I kind of had on my mind, and I thought, no, let's see if I can make this make sense a little bit. So when we're talking about this issue in Kenosha, and let me see. Let's put this into perspective. Here's what Wisconsin in the map. Let's move this over. Wisconsin, where the population, now this is the place in Wisconsin where there is the highest percentage of black people. The population of Kenosha, it's only 6.6%. Only 6.6% of the population of Kenosha is black. So if only 6% of the population of Kenosha is black, why do you think it is that most of the white people a lot of the white people in Kenosha and a whole lot of the white people in Wisconsin don't give a damn about what the Kenosha Police Department has been doing to black people and a few other people for decades? And why they really don't care that black people are protesting against this decades, black people and our allies are protesting against this decades of police violence and are actually celebrating this 17-year-old terrorist who came across state lines from Illinois with a gun that he wasn't even legally allowed to possess because he is 17 and shot two unarmed people who were protesting. Why do you think so many people in Wisconsin think that that kid is a hero and are actually disparaging the people who are protesting for justice? It's because these people don't live around those people. And the people who live in Kenosha County, the 6.6% of the African Americans who live in Kenosha County, they know that a lot of the people in Kenosha don't care about what happens to them either. So, I don't know how much this will... Yeah, it won't go in any further. I think that's another map. But when you look at this map and you see all of these people, all of these white people in Wisconsin who don't live around black people, they just don't. So when we see the media and the really completely screwed up way they have been framing these protests and the terrorist who came to a protest of unarmed people protesting for justice, armed like he was going to war, then you begin to understand why these people believe that they are at war with folks who are protesting for justice. They just do not live around us. So they don't care about what's done to us because the media tells them that what the police and what the justice system and what politicians do to us, we deserve it. And then the media confirms their bias with the way they report these kinds of things. This is an article in The Guardian. Excuse me. And this is a really great article that goes into how so many media outlets, and not just conservative outlets, have tried so hard to make, oh, he's a kid, he's a 17-year-old kid, and, you know, he aspired to be a cop, and, you know, he was, you know, just trying to humanize this terrorist. They've called him a volunteer. They've called him a vigilante. No, I mean, a vigilante usually is a word usually described, word usually used to describe an unauthorized person who takes it upon themselves to protect their community in the absence of legal authorities doing so. That's not what this situation was at all. It's not. It wasn't at all. Now, there's been a whole lot of focus on property damage in these protests, and that's what white people are all freaked out about, because, you know, they don't live around us, so they think that we are just out here protesting, just tearing up all the things. And this whole thing of property damage being equated with black people, and the protection of property values being equated with black people, it's old as hell. It is an old and effective trope that has kept white people terrified of black people, convinced that they don't want to live around us, and continually voting for politicians who promise to keep the Negroes out of the nice white neighborhoods. I'm seriously not making that up, and I will show you why in a minute. But this wasn't vigilantism, because this was a protest that was happening in, in Kenosha. This person, this Rittenhouse terrorist, lived in Illinois. So this wasn't his community, but see, white people see themselves wherever they are in this country and around the world as all belonging to the same community, which is why a bunch of folks who have a problem with Pan-Africanism, y'all have lost your minds. White people see themselves as a part of the Western civilization white community wherever they are in the world. And you're seeing that now coming out in the Republican National Convention with the references to white civilization. And yeah, I know a couple black people said it too, but we say all the time, black people can be mascots for white supremacy. They can uphold white supremacy too, even if they don't recognize that's what they're doing, if you pay them enough. But that is absolutely true. So these people who, it was a militia that put out this call to go to Kenosha and protect property. They didn't do this because they felt like the police weren't going to do it. They did this because they see white people as being a part of their community, and white property owners especially as being a part of their community who needs their help. So that's why you had people from Illinois going to Kenosha talking about protecting the community. It's the community of white people. But this was not Rittenhouse's, or whatever his name is, his community. He didn't live there. He didn't live in the state. So he wasn't legitimately protecting his community. He was actually also committing a crime in possessing a weapon in the first place, because he's 17. And you cannot legally own a gun at 17. But his mama got it for him, according to the reports, and his mama was the one who drove him across state lines. So when we gonna have a conversation about this little white boy and his amoral parents? What kind of parents did he come from? Because see, this is the way the media has talked about the young black victims of not just police violence, but of random white racist violence. If there's a picture of that black kid on their social media with, weed, oh, he was a criminal. Oh, remember what they said about Trayvon Martin? He was suspended from school because he had weed in his backpack. Oh, he was a criminal. Well, this man and I called him a man, he actually murdered someone. He actually murdered 2 people. But white people don't call him a criminal, they call him a hero, because he was protecting their white community from the black marauders. And the media confirms their bias with the way they humanize this terrorist. They call him a vigilante. They say he was an avid supporter of the police, that he was maintaining peace. You know how you can maintain peace? Give people justice. Make sure that people live in a state of justice. That's how you ensure peace. But that's not what white people believe. That's not what a lot of white people believe, because a lot of white people believe that you maintain peace through force. He is a terrorist. Somebody got that right. But, publications don't want to call him that. I think it was Esquire. Yeah, Esquire said that his attack was an act of what could only be called a terrorist tourism. That's interesting. But they didn't outright call him a terrorist. But the media has done, and they continue to try to humanize this monster. Whereas we know that the victims of police violence and racist terrorism don't get the same kind of treatment from the media. And when you don't live in an area where the police are brutalizing you and the people you live around every day, when you don't live around people who are subjected to racial discrimination and racist terrorism on a regular basis, when you don't live around people who are mistreated because of the color of their skin, then of course you think that what the media says about black people in the protests is true, and what this person did in Kenosha was the act of a hero. All because most white people in this country, most white people in Wisconsin, and most white people in this country do not live around black people. But here's where the conversation needs to turn to the fact that most white people in this country don't live around black people because they don't want to. And how this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it is the very racist tropes about black people that created the situation where white people kept voting for politicians that made sure that black people didn't live around them, that they didn't live around black people. This whole thing of, we talk about redlining all the time, and the population dispersal across the country is a result of redlining. It absolutely is. Because if we drill down into the cities where where there are significant populations of black people, we will further see that most black people are concentrated in major cities, like usually in the capital cities, in those areas with surrounding areas around those major cities that are mostly white. Those are the suburbs. That's where white people went when black people came to the major cities, where the jobs were. And this was by design. This was intentional. The first legislation, the first redlining legislation that was drafted, was implemented in this country, came out of Baltimore. And it was implemented by Mayor Barry Mahul in 1910, who said, oh, sorry, you cannot see that. Sorry, apologies. In 1910, he said, Mayor Barry Mahul in 1910 said that blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums in order to reduce the incidence of civil disturbance, to prevent the spread of communicable disease into the nearby white neighborhoods, and to protect property values among the white majority. Remember what I said a few minutes ago about the idea of protecting property value of white people being closely tied to racist stereotypes about black people, and how those stereotypes were used to keep black people from living next to white people. This is where it comes from. Now, this isn't, let's be clear, racial discrimination against black people obviously existed in this country long before 1910, slavery, okay? But codifying it into a residential law, because Jim Crow existed, and if, as you can see here, I hope you can see here in this little inset in the middle here, where this is from a newspaper from the time and I think it was a Baltimore newspaper, that says strange situation which led the Oriole City to adopt the most pronounced Jim Crow measure on record. Before this redlining law existed in Baltimore, Jim Crow existed, but first of all, this was in the North, and second, this was worse than anything that had existed before. Public accommodations were, segregated, but nothing like this existed until J. Barry Mahul, who was supposed to be a so-called progressive. He was supposed to be for social justice and he was for women's suffrage, but he thought that black people were diseased and needed to be kept away from white people to protect white people's property values. Oh. So, again, I gotta keep going back to this map. And the fact that this trope, this canard, this narrative of black people being more criminal, black people being, just diseased and amoral, and we want handouts and all we want to do is have babies and we don't want education and we don't value family and everything negative about black people that you can think up that you have heard, that white people believe, that too many white people believe. They believe it because it has helped them maintain their distance from us legally. As long as they keep, and this is the thing, it's like this weird cyclical self-fulfilling kind of prophecy, like white people believe the lies about black people because they don't live around us, but they don't live around us because they believe the lies about black people. Like they believe the lies about black people, and they use those as excuses for why they don't want to live around us and why they keep voting for politicians who promise that they will not force them to live around us, who promise that they will keep their white neighborhoods white. And so they don't say that we're going to keep your white neighborhoods white. What they say is we're going to keep affordable housing from being built in the suburbs. That's what they say in 2020. And just to be clear, the so-called Democrats aren't any better by saying that affordable housing is decided by the developers, and the developers decide what affordable is, and they make affordable a ridiculous percentage of the market value of whatever the housing is, which still puts it out of reach for most poor people, and a significant percentage of those people, poor people, are black. This is all by design. This is all intentional. So when white people who, choose to believe that, that property value, they're more angry at property damage than they are at the police violating human beings' rights and even constitutional rights, because these are the same people who love themselves some Constitution. It all goes back to the fact that property value for white people is like the first tenet of their gospel of white supremacy, even if they don't think they're racist, because this is what they have been conditioned to believe they should protect by keeping black people away from them. They've been conditioned to believe that having black people live near them is going to bring their property values down, and if their property values come down, then their way of life is going to be completely fucked. That's what they believe. That's what came out of that law in Baltimore in 1910. Let's see, what else do I have up here? I forget. Oh, that's right. Okay, let me go here for a second. Also, this idea, the stereotypes, the racist stereotypes about black people, that, you know, we're so much more criminal, we're so much more, you know, we don't like education, and, you know, we don't bathe, and whatever ridiculous bullshit you hear from racist white people. That also comes out of very intentional narratives that were used to marginalize black people. Time, making policy for white people who live in the same conditions. This is a book that we talk about all of the time. The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and the Making of Modern Urban America. Ooh, it's got a new preface, which means I have to get a new copy. This book is by Khalil Gibran Muhammad. This book is amazing, blew my mind. I did not know any of this history. I don't know all the history. I just love history, because history always has this way of blowing my mind and teaching me something about the history teaching me something about why we are here at this moment every time I dig into it. And this book is no different. The idea of black criminality. Let me see if I'm going to blow this up for you. So you can read along with me. There we go. The idea of black criminality was crucial to the making of modern urban America, as were African Americans' own ideas about race and crime. The things that white people did, the narratives they created to justify their oppression of black people, also infected us, to the point where some of us believed that there was something wrong with us. That's how deep this indoctrination has been to all of us in this country, and truly around the world. Chronicling the emergence of deeply embedded notions of black people as a dangerous race of criminals by explicit contrast to working class whites and European immigrants, Khalil Gibran Muhammad reveals the influence such ideas have had on our urban development and social policies. This book is extremely important because it reveals the history of how one man who is an actuary scientist, let me see if his name is down here, Kaufman, I can't remember his first name right now, but he is called the father of actuary science, Frederick Hoffman. He was an actuary for the Prudential in the early 1900s, and he wrote a tract called Race Traits and the Practices of the Negro, or something like that he used to justify not insuring black people. And that tract was full of all of the racist stereotypes about the criminality and the dirtiness and the propensity toward vice of black people. He wrote that to justify, to make the case that black people should not be insured. And that document has been used to perpetuate the racist policies against black people, especially in urban areas, ever since. Because this is what happens. This is what happens with redlining. Some politician says that this is the point that I want to make. When white European immigrants lived in the same poverty that black people lived in, and resorted to the same crime, the same vice, set up the same gangs, ran the same kind of extortion schemes, ran the same numbers, had the same kind of brothels. Sometimes the European immigrants and the black folks were in the same brothels. They were running the same whiskey during Prohibition, were running the same juke joints, speakeasies. all committing the same crime because they were all living in poverty and they all had a lack of economic opportunity. What happened because of these racist stereotypes that came from these so-called experts was that black people were criminalized and they were policed. They were policed and ostracized, and they were and policies were created that further punished black people for their so-called criminality. But white people who lived in poverty, who did the same things, who committed the same crimes, they were given policies that helped them rise out of the poverty. They were given policy, and their crime was romanticized in American fiction. Where do you think all these mob movies come from? Italian immigrants, European, other European immigrants, immigrants from Poland, from other European countries coming to this country, experiencing some kind of discrimination, living in the same poverty that black people lived in, but those people were seen by politicians as, well, we need to craft policy to help them rise out of their criminality. And some of them didn't rise out of their criminality because the profit was too good, and we made movies out of their criminality. The Godfather series. It traces the lineage of that family back to those immigrants. But black people, we got cops. We were criminalized for having to survive under the same oppressive system of poverty, and that's where the race and class issue comes to fore in this country. Because yes, the European immigrants were absolutely discriminated against because of class issues, but they were offered a way out. And their crime, their needing to resort to crime to survive their oppression, was romanticized in this country. Black people were criminalized for doing the exact same things solely because they were black. Solely because we're black. And we didn't get romanticized. I mean, I remember when the movie Hoodlum came out. I love that joint. And white people lost their minds. How can they glorify crime? What? The Godfather, bitches. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop cussing so much today. So, yeah, please get this book. It is extremely important to understanding why we are here today. Let me close some of these things. Property value. Property values. Yes. Let me talk about property values for a minute, because that's really what this is ultimately, what is freaking so many white people out, because they think, that we're out here just tearing up all the white people's stores. And we're going to come to the suburbs and tear up all the white people's houses because Black Lives Matter. That's what they really believe. And the thing about this conversation about property value that pisses me off so much, is that whenever people talk about the protests when black people protest and some property gets damaged, and I'm not going to say that there wasn't property damage. That would be stupid. Of course there was property damage. There was a bit of property damage in Kenosha, and there was some in Portland and some other places, but it was not just widespread, wanton. Kenosha still exists. The city still exists. Portland still exists. Ain't nobody burned the city to the ground like Fox News would like to have you believe. That's not what happened at all. But this discussion about property value that people are obsessed with, and they elevate the damage of property in these protests to the violence against people's bodies and lives, is so obscene to me, because of the way that the violence against black people has been completely ignored, and willfully so, by the same white folks who are pissed off about property damage right now. Because, see, you can't talk to me about property damage today, and I'm not going to bring up the Red Summer of 1919. Because this was after World War One, and this is in Teen Vogue. Now, I got to tell you, I don't know when Teen Vogue became radical, but damn, they doing a good job. This was published May of this year. And it talks about this summer in 1919 after World War I, when black veterans, like 370,000 black veterans who went across the world to fight for freedom for other people, for this country, and came back and realized that they didn't have freedom still here, and they were mad. They were pissed, and they had a right to be. But then the white people over here were like, oh, we don't want these Negroes coming back thinking that just because they fought in a war, they gonna have a better time here than they did. White people actually believed that. They did not want black soldiers coming back here thinking that they had any more rights to anything else than they had when they left, before they left to fight. I'm serious. And that's what this racist backlash against black people coming back to this country after having fought in a war overseas, standing up for their rights, that's what that was mostly about. Yes, it was about jobs, but it was about black people coming back from this war saying, you mean to tell me you're not going to give me a job because I'm black and I fought in a war for you? What? So across this country, and I think I need to magnify this a bit so you can read it too. Across this country in the summer of 1919, a wave of anti-black collective violence that were called race riots then. Back then, those were the race riots. White people assaulting and attacking and murdering black people and destroying our property. Occurred in Charleston, South Carolina, Longview, Texas, in Arizona, in D.C., in Chicago, Tennessee, Omaha, Arkansas, and actually other places that we're still learning did happen. We don't have an accurate accounting of just how many acts of mob violence white people committed against black people across the country during that time, because, you know, white people just didn't care about keeping a record of how many black people they assaulted, killed, and whose property they looted and robbed and stole. But it happened. And this is the kind of violence against people that white people act like that just didn't exist, didn't matter. So I feel like it's ironic to the point of hypocritical for white people to be talking about, oh my God, how can they commit all this violence when really they're talking about property damage, but we ain't never been compensated for the property damage, if you just want to talk about property, for the property damage of white people, not just assaulting and murdering our ancestors, but looting and destroying our homes and businesses and driving tens and thousands of our people out of the towns and the communities that they built. White people did that to us. And they have a nerve to be mad because some windows get broken now? Ugh. But see, this right here, this is why they can do that. Because they keep voting for politicians who keep downplaying the history of the crimes of white people against black people in this country. Because they don't live around us. So they don't care. Alright, so that's Teen Vogue. Let's see. This is from Howard Zinn, the Zen Education Project, one of my absolute favorite sources for history. I love this. I love white rage, black self-defense. White supremacists lynched nearly 100 black people and initiated dozens of smaller racist clashes Throughout 1919 in Pittsburgh, the Klan made clear the goal of this bloody work in the printed notices posted around the black neighborhood. The war is over, Negroes. Stay in your place. If you don't, we'll put you there. Oh, historian Carol Anderson writes in her 2016 book, White Rage, says the trigger for white rage inevitably is black advancement. It is not the mere presence of black people that is the problem. Rather, it is blackness with ambition, with drive, with purpose, with aspirations, and with demands for full and equal citizenship. Yeah, I pulled this up because I wanted you to see. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this was going to happen. Okay. Where is it? Come on. Oh, now it's not showing. Okay. Well, let's go back to this one. This is a picture of white people. This is in 1919. This is in Chicago. And the source was the page that I flipped to that this picture didn't show up. But the source is by Jun Fujita. And this is in the Chicago History Museum. This is from 1919, from the Chicago Race Riot. This is white people after they have looted a black person's home. They have broken the windows out. They've driven the black people from the house. They have gone in there, taken the black people's stuff. They've looted the home. Yeah, he got 2 guns and some more, and he ain't playing. This is another picture of a white mob running with bricks during the race riot in Chicago. Running with bricks to throw at black people and to destroy black property with. Let me just for shits and giggles. Oh, let's see. Let's see what comes up. Don't talk to me about property damage. I don't want to hear about property damage in these protests. And understand something. There is also something going on in these protests where racist white people are using these protests as a way to incite violence against the protesters by creating havoc, which means that there have been white supremacists who have set fires, who have caused property damage, and who have actually murdered people and tried to blame it on the protesters. That's what happened in Oakland when Mike Pence mentioned the sister of the cop who was killed in Oakland during the uprising, and he tries to make the connection between the cop being killed by the protesters, but the cop was not killed by the protesters. The cop was killed by 2 or 3 white people who were part of this Boogaloo movement. They killed 2 cops. But you don't hear that talked about. You don't see the outrage in the corporate media about those white people who killed those 2 cops in California. No. And that's why Mike Pence can say on national television that, oh, this cop was killed in Oakland amid these protests, and leave out the part that he was killed by racist white people, because and people believe it, because most of the people who believe it don't live around us, and they know this. Let me go back to my images of all of the violence. There's an image of a white mob attacking a black person. That is exactly what you think it is. Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can. Yeah, this is another image of white people destroying the property of black people. Let me see if this is Wikipedia. Ugh. Wikipedia is not my favorite source, but this is what I wanted to show you. Yeah, that's a human being. That's Will Brown. And this is a mob of white people who, during the Red Summer of 1919, lynched him. They stood around and posed for a picture. They stood around, posed for a picture, some of them smiling, as the body of their victim burned. I keep thinking I'm clicking on pictures and I'm clicking on different articles. Let me stop doing that. Yeah, so as you can see, these are military members confronting a black man on the street. This ain't new to us. Having the National Guard intimidate us on the street, this ain't new. America's been doing this to us. Why? Because we demand justice. We demand equality. That's it. That's all. Of course, this is what was left of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, after white people implemented their property damage on the entire town. They destroyed the entire town. I don't want to hear about I don't want to hear about you being upset because some windows were broken and the correctional facility in Kenosha, Wisconsin was burned to the ground. Y'all have burned entire towns, entire communities of ours to the ground. You have stolen the land that indigenous people lived on. Forcibly moved people off of their land and corralled them onto reservations. Some property damage. Oh, here's some more. Here's some more property damage for you. You can see in this picture some of the property that was taken out of the people's house. I think you get the picture. I could get carried away with this kind of stuff because I just get sick and tired of white people and this property damage trope, and black people being apologists for it. Just, black people always, the first thing we got to do. But when we talk about these protests, white people don't want to hear anything about racial justice and economic justice until we condemn property destruction, until we condemn the violence of the protesters. Listen, I don't want anybody's business to be destroyed. I don't want anybody's home to be destroyed. And as far as I know, nobody's home has been destroyed in any of these protests. I don't want people's businesses to be destroyed. If you don't want unrest in your streets, make sure that the people who live on your streets live in justice. If you are going to ignore injustices committed against the people who live in your communities, then expect some trouble at some point. If you just keep ignoring it, I don't know. That usually works with everything else. Okay. Covered that. Let me look at my notes. So what happens when, going back to this trope about protecting white property values, or protecting property values that white people are so invested in, that they feel like is like a religious mantra for them, that they must do to save the way of life for white people, and they have to save the way of life for black people from black people in order to do that, protect their property values from black people. What does that mean? What does that translate into in regard to the way black people live in communities in this country? Well, let me tell you what it means. So you create redlining and you make it so that black people can't live in this area, that black people can only live in this area. So then organizations start popping up to serve that industry, to make sure that people are funneled to areas where where they're going to be assured that there will be no black people, and to keep black people in their place. So the private sector gets involved in it, and the real estate industry caters to it. The National Association of Real Estate Boards is the predecessor to today's National Association of Realtor. Realtor actually was a term that was created in 1916. I didn't know that. And now you know too. What did the NAREB do? Well, they were committed to propagating segregation in the housing market. Yes, y'all. The National Association of Real Estate Boards was created to ensure that housing remained segregated. Oh boy. This is just a little, pretty cool timeline of housing segregation and how it evolved to what we know now. This is the thing that is incredibly important in this idea of maintaining property values by keeping black people out of white neighborhoods. Because see, white people are made to believe that black people just living near them will reduce their property value, because allegedly of the way we live, because we're so prone to violence, because we are predisposed to vice, because we're not so clean, because we don't value education, and all this stuff comes out of those racist tropes that you can learn and uncover were institutionalized in Gibran Muhammad's book, The Condemnation of Blackness. But the flip side of that phenomenon, giving white people a reason to keep black people out of their neighborhoods, ostensibly to protect their property values, the flip side of that is what those kinds of ideas created in black neighborhoods. Because remember, I talked a few minutes ago about how white immigrants who were forced to pursue crime in order to survive because of the discrimination they faced and the poverty they lived in, they were given opportunities to escape that poverty, programs and better housing and better education and better access to health care, and their crime and vice was romanticized, but black people were penalized. We were punished for the exact same things that white people were. Do you understand what I'm saying? So how did that look? How did that punishment look? Let me see. There we go. It looks like disinvestment. So when white people look at black neighborhoods and say they don't keep up their property, they don't take care of anything, look at the way they destroyed their homes, that's not it. It's because politicians have used the same racist tropes, the same racist stereotypes to craft policies that intentionally disinvest from the black communities that they force black people to live in. So the property values in black communities are low, not because black people don't know how to take care of their properties, but because municipalities do not invest in those properties the same way they invest in properties where white people live. So there's disinvestment in public services. There's the reason in places like New York City in the 60s and in the 70s where there was, garbage all over the place, was because if it was a black neighborhood, then they just wouldn't pick the trash up all that frequently. Because black people live there. And if you see that there is so much more crime in neighborhoods where black people live, That is because there are no jobs in that area, so there are more poor people in that area, and maybe people want to eat, so they'll do anything they have to do to eat and keep a roof over their head, and sometimes that's committing crime. So there are more cops in a lot of black neighborhoods where there are more poor people, and maybe people are just fucking depressed by all of this history, centuries of this history, that they continue to see every day when they walk out of their apartment or their home, walk through their neighborhood, and they know that this is all by design. The misery they live under and around, it's all by design. And they're still being blamed for it. And maybe they just want to escape this oppressive existence just for a little while. So instead of being able to enjoy their recreational drugs in the privacy of their own home, like white people do, they get arrested for possession by the cops and spend 5 to 10 years in prison. And then they come out and they can't get a job. It's all by design. That's the other side of redlining. Redlining didn't just keep black people in this neighborhood and white people in that neighborhood. No, redlining perpetuated the racist idea that property values are low where black people live by intentionally implementing policies that kept property values low where black people lived. Honestly, from sanitation to housing appraisals. There was a story just a couple of days ago floating around about a couple, an interracial couple that was selling their home, and they got their house appraised, and it was appraised for a lot less than they know was the market value. So the wife, who was black, did a little experiment. She took all of the family pictures of their baby and you know, her family off the walls, put everything away, took all the books, the black books, took them off the bookshelves, kept the pictures of the husband's family up, and they actually didn't have those up before because he wasn't close with his family. Those pictures were like in the garage. So they put the pictures of his family up, and she was not at the house when it was appraised the second time. Only he was there. She had taken their little interracial baby to the park while the appraiser came the next time to appraise the house. And that time the appraiser valued the house at 20% over market value. So yeah, this is I had to that was just, whew, I'll give you a link to that. I'll give you a link to that little thing. But so what does this mean? What does this mean? Why did I take the time today to have this little lunchtime lesson with you? I think that's what I'm going to call these, lunchtime lessons. I dig that. We got to stop trying. I don't know about you, but I am going to stop trying to convince white people that racism is a real thing. I'm not gonna do it. And I'm not telling you that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that black people shouldn't do it anymore. That's what I'm just not going to have another conversation with a white person about the fact is this, that, and the third. They don't live around us. They don't care. They believe what the media says about us. That's why they believe that this little 17-year-old terrorist is a hero. He is protecting the white community and their property values from the boogeyman of the black people that this country has created. Not the truth, but the truth doesn't matter to these people. So what does that mean? Where does that leave us if I think that we should stop trying to preach to a choir that doesn't even want to be in the same church service as us? then we gotta work with people who want to be in the same service with us. We've got to build coalition with people who get it, who want to learn, who understand how serious this is, who want something better, and we need to build coalition and organization with those people. And this also means that we have to cut some ties with some so-called progressives who are fixated on appeasing racist white people as opposed to pushing for actual justice for oppressed people. I had an interaction with somebody that I worked with on another outlet a couple of years ago, and I actually forgot that he's who he was when I accepted his friend request. It had been that long. But this person told me that he might speak harshly of neo-fascists, but he still loves them. If you call yourself a progressive and you love neo-fascists and you love fascists, you would just as soon watch them kill me as you would. I don't have to deal with those people either. But let me tell you, I left that comment on my page because I really wanted people to see that within the progressive movement, there are some people who are just as dangerous as the fascists and the racists that we are fighting. And we need to cut ties with those people. That's the one reason I didn't block that guy, because I want people to see that that's the kind of garbage that we've been dealing with in the so-called progressive movement, at least online, for the past 6 or 7 years. And these are people who have been fine with people being racist. They've been fine with people being sexist. They've been fine with people being toxic and abusive and manipulative of people. And we need to cut ties with those folks. I don't care how many followers they have. I don't care how solid their analysis on anything is. If you talk about you love neo-fascists, no, we're not in the same church service. We're not in the same church building. We're not in the same faith. We don't have the same beliefs. And it's okay for us to say that. It's time for us, seriously, people don't like cancel culture. My life and the life of the lives of my family and my friends and my comrades depends on us not getting hooked up with people who are not invested in our liberation. So if people feel like, oh, that's cancel culture and that's bad, you're absolutely right. I am going to cancel people out of my circle, out of my community. I'm not going to deal with people or engage with people who are not expressly about the liberation of black people, indigenous people, queer people, disabled people, women, of people, of Afro-descended people around the world. I'm not going to engage or connect with or work with people who are not committed to the liberation of all oppressed people around the world. And nobody who is committed to the liberation of oppressed people can fix their mouth to say that they love fascists. So this is where we are, I believe, folks. This is why. This is why you've got so many people, you've got so many white people who talk about they don't understand. Oh my God, how he's a hero. I don't understand what these black people are so angry about. These protests don't make any sense. Black people have it good. There's no racism. This is why you got so many people talking about all lives matter. But they're the same people who ain't protesting when a white person gets shot in the middle of the street like a dog by the cops. understand that. I think for me, this is a perfect visual representation of knowing how to read your audience, knowing how to read the room. Read the room, folks. Most white people don't live around us. They don't care about us. We need to really, really stop. At least black people, at least black folks in this struggle. Educating these people, that needs not to be the focus of most black people in these struggle, unless they come to us wanting to know better and do better. We need to leave those folks to our white allies and comrades who live around them. That's their job. Our job is to continue to organize and struggle for true liberation among ourselves. That's what I got to say today. Thanks a lot, y'all. Listen, if you like what you see and hear out of Lukman Nation when it's a lot more organized than it was today, you can find us on patreon.com/Lukman Nation, LUQMANNATION. And, support us if you see fit. We appreciate all of your help and support. Do share this video. Share it to people you don't like. Share it to people who think this terrorist is a hero. And look, just keep on struggling. Forward ever, backward never. Peace.